So I'm just going to sort of get started, and I hope you can all hear me. And I just want to say good afternoon and welcome to our first event for Voices, the Community Story Project. And you're going to meet today the project steering group and the project officer, Taylor Webb. I think you all know me. My name's Audrey Wilson, and I'm the Partnership and Engagement Manager at Scottish Council and Archives. And on behalf of everyone, I just want to say a huge welcome and thank you all for signing up to take part in this oral history project. It's come about to celebrate the Scottish Government's initiative, Scotland's Year of Stories 2022, and Scottish Council and Archives are creating a national focused project, and that's called Voices, the Community Story. And it's bringing together the stories of people living in all regions of Scotland, and it will be an opportunity to learn new skills, meet new people, and form future partnerships. So we bring together qualified archivists, heritage professionals, and community groups. Many of them are volunteers, and we are going to provide oral history training, which will be delivered online by Sarah Lowry, who is a qualified trainer from the Oral History Society, who is in the audience and is on my screen, I can see. And I've asked you all to complete a doodle poll to when you will be available. Taylor will put a link to the doodle poll up because we'd like to get those dates in the calendar so we can get started on actually learning how to record the stories. There will be also the project webpage, which will be a go-to place for information on all the participants that are taking part in this project. There will be very useful resources and links to other projects or websites out with this project that are taking part in Scotland's Year of Stories 2022. All of this is free and is available to everyone. So our aim is to empower people to take ownership of their own stories and be part of a sustainable archive of the future. This project is the first step, and it's hoped that everyone involved will be part of the next steps and will continue to record people's voices and collaborate with each other. This will be part of the project evaluation, and to celebrate the end of this project and Scotland's Year of Stories 2022, we will be hosting a physical event on the 30th of November at New Register House. So please put the date in your diary. It's St Andrew's Day, which is very appropriate, I think, as well, for a project like this, which is all around migration. So I mentioned Taylor before, and I just want to welcome Taylor back to Scottish Council and Archives. Taylor Webb was our summer intern last year on the pilot project to this called Voices, the Hebridean Story. I think many of you have got a link to it, but Taylor will be putting a link into the chat room if you do want to look at it again. The aim of that oral history project was to interview, publish and archive a snapshot of the unique stories and experiences of people living in the Scottish Hebrides during COVID-19 pandemic. So Taylor is a project officer on this project and will be creating and updating the project webpage, as well as offering help and support with any recordings, editing and anything else that you might need help with. Don't hesitate to get in touch with us. So we have a variety of presentations from the project steering group. You've all been sent a programme, and we will have questions and we will hopefully answer as many as we can at the end of all the presentations. I'll introduce each speaker, and hopefully by the end of the event you will feel very inspired to start your recordings. Just a few housekeeping announcements. This is a Zoom meeting, which means you will be able to fully participate in the chat and the discussion. We can see you and you can unmute yourself, but we ask that you keep your mics off unless you're speaking at the end. And that just means that it will be a very smooth running event. If you do want to ask a question of the speakers, I suggest you put a capital Q at the beginning of your question and we'll gather them up, and either we can ask them or you can unmute and ask yourself. And as I say, there will be an opportunity for wider discussion at the end of the presentations. Today is being recorded, so please note that if you contribute to the discussion either in the open session or via the chat bar, it will be recorded. So please just be aware of other people and be careful about what you say, so we keep it friendly and lively, and we don't say anything we might regret later on. I also want to say, if you do want to ask your own question, you can raise a hand digitally. There's the toolbar at the bottom of the screen, or just wave at me and I will look out for you, and then we can see you there. So my other screen's gone completely blank. So I'm going to say, I'm going to start us off. Oh yes, I did want to say we are tweeting, and that's something I haven't really mentioned to you, but if you do have a Twitter handle, please put it in the chat room and we'll take a note of it. Our Twitter handle is @CArchiveScot. Again, Taylor will put that in to the chat room in case you are on Twitter and you want to take part. So without much ado, I'm going to introduce this first speaker, who is the archivist, Shona MacDonald, who very much took part in our pilot project, Voices, the Hebridean Story. And she will be talking as a qualified archivist with over 25 years of experience about the Hebridean story and about best practice and meeting archival standards, and we'll maybe be focusing a little bit on the cataloguing, the transcript and the accessibility of digital archives. I should say she is up on Lewis at the Western Isles, the Western Isles Council archive, which I believe is known as Tasglan and Eileen. I may have pronounced that. No, it's not. It's, oh, Caroline's nodding. Shona is not nodding. So I'm going to let Shona tell you exactly what the Gaelic is for that. And that's where the Voices, the Hebridean Story, the recordings are held. I'm going to pass you over to Shona. Thanks.
Thank you, Audrey. I'm just going to share my screen. Can everyone see that? Okay, so thank you, Audrey. As Audrey said, I am the archivist at Tasglan and Newlan, which is the archive service of the Outer Hebrides. Well, sorry, the archive service for the local authority, which serves the Outer Hebrides. So I'd like to start by saying sorry if you're an archivist. I wasn't sure who would all be attending today, so some of this will be a bit simple if you're an archivist. So Audrey asked me to begin the steering group presentations, and I was thinking it might seem a bit strange to start a session about the archiving element of a project. Most people would probably assume that you should archive material when it's no longer current, and it might therefore be more natural to consider it as the final step in any project's sort of evolution. But in this day and age, when we're creating material digitally, it is something that should ideally be considered at the outset of any project that's going to produce digital material. So reasonable questions for people carrying out an oral history project might be, what do we want to do with the recordings we make? Do we want to make them available to the public on a website? Do we want them to be available at a particular geographic location? Or perhaps you're a community group thinking of using them in an exhibition or museum display. There are lots of different uses that oral history recordings could potentially be put to. But whatever your group intends to do with them in the short to medium term, you should also discuss what you're going to do with them in a longer term, and perhaps when the project is no longer ongoing. And at that point, hopefully it will occur to you to deposit them with an archive service for the longer term preservation. So why should a community group consider depositing oral history material in an archive? The purpose of an archive service at its core, if you were breaking it down into its most simplistic, would be to, first of all, permanently preserve records which are of enduring value. And secondly, to make the records and collections held accessible to the community. They could be accessible for all different reasons. It could be for research, it could be for education, it could be for enjoyment. So by depositing the oral history recordings in an archive, you're ensuring that they're going to be preserved and accessible in the future beyond the lifespan of the project. And also the recordings may eventually be put to uses which your initial project had not envisaged. So having thought about what you're going to do with the recordings in the longer term, and having hopefully decided it is a good idea to deposit the project outputs in an archive, what are the implications of that decision? There would be a few implications, which would be, first of all, if you're creating project documentation, which hopefully you are, to inform participants, you would need to include in your documentation the fact that the recordings will eventually be deposited in an archive. So for example, your project information sheet and your participant agreement form should include that information, so that when someone signs to agree that they're participating in the project, they're basically building consent. You're building consent for them to ultimately be deposited in an archive. And that helps to create a seamless process for the archive service when it gets to the point where they are going to be transferred. Because one of the considerations which you would take into account as an archivist when receiving material is whether the people who are part of the project had consented to being archived, if you like. Other implications would be ensuring that the format of the files that you're going to create are suitable for long-term preservation. So hopefully it will encourage people to talk to their local archive service and find out what sort of digital files they would want, what sort of digital format they would want the files to be in. So thinking about the benefits of an archive service in general, not just for oral history. So by depositing material in an archive service, the archive service is then going to take the necessary steps to securely store the material and maintain its integrity. The material will be documented to archival standards. So archives have a certain way of cataloguing, so that all the information about the provenance of the project is captured and any required metadata. In the future, once the catalogue records are complete and made available to the public, you're then making them accessible so that people can discover the material that exists online. And that creates the added value of what I was talking about earlier. Your recordings may end up being used in research or for purposes that you had maybe not initially envisaged. So if someone's able to search your catalogue on a particular theme, for example, crofting or weaving or something like that, they're going to find all the different materials regardless of format. So, well, hopefully if your catalogue is any good, that is, they're going to find that you might have written records on those topics. You may have, I don't know, all sorts of different material, but the oral history recordings will then be part of a bigger picture. And so you're adding value to your initial project for the public and for a variety of audiences for years to come. In terms of sustainability, there are steps that the archive service would need to take to ensure the long-term sustainability of the digital material. This is still evolving. This, you know, the practice of digital preservation is an evolving field. So what that means is there's lots of specialist organisations looking at all the different issues around preservation of digital files. And so hopefully the archive service is keeping on top of what was the latest advice, where to, you know, what is the best source for the latest advice, because it is a fairly specialist field. And so, for example, you will be looking at what sort of formats are perhaps going to be obsolete, how you're going to migrate your files to a new format if required at some point in future. You'll have sustainable storage with backups and disaster prevention measures, and you'll be periodically reviewing files to check that they're not deteriorating. So sustainability in an archive implies that you've got methods and standards in place to keep, you know, to keep a check on things. This doesn't just apply to digital files, I should say, it does apply to paper records as well. You'll have a body of practice and procedures and processes that as a whole mean that you're doing everything humanly possible to make sure that material's preserved for the longer term. And then there are also around inventories, accessioning, tracking. So the ultimate goal of an archive service is to know what you have, where it is, how to find it, how to be able to produce it for people to use. And that applies, as I say, to any material, and digital and analog. So Audrey's informed me that we're doing questions at the end. So that was just a very brief overview of the benefits of just, considering depositing the materials with an archive service. And as I say, I'm sorry if that was overfamiliar for people who are archivists or work in an archive service. So yeah, I'll stop sharing now, and I hope I didn't go over my time, Audrey.
No, that's fantastic, because I think I went over my time a little bit actually. So no, perfect timing. Thank you, Shona. And as I say, you might have lots of questions that Shona has maybe raised some things that you hadn't thought about before. Pop things in the chat room if you like. If you're happy to ask them later, let us know. But if you want one of us to ask, put a Q at the beginning of it, and then we can ask on your behalf. I'm going to move straight on to our next speaker, who's also part of the steering group. Delighted to welcome Mark Mulhern, who is the Senior Research Fellow at the European Ethnological Research Centre, which is part of the University of Edinburgh. I think you've worked there since 2004, my information is telling me, Mark, and you are now leading on the spoken word, which is a strand of the Regional Ethnology of Scotland project. So you are responsible for volunteer field workers, the recruitment and training and support of them, and you have created materials particularly for them. And I'm just really going to let you speak, because actually I've got so much information, it's so relevant to this project. I think probably it's best for you to now just chat. Thanks.
Thanks, Audrey. Hello, everybody. As Audrey was saying, I'm Mark Mulhern. I'm from the European Ethnological Research Centre. We are based within Celtic and Scottish Studies at the University of Edinburgh. And as Audrey was saying, I'm going to talk to you about our main project, which is the Regional Ethnology of Scotland project. So I'll just share a couple of slides with you here. First one of which details some of the statistical information. So we're a community-based oral history research project. We started in 2011 in Dumfries and Galloway. And then we moved on to East Lothian in 2018, where we're still active. But currently we're also active in Dundee, Edinburgh, Lewis and Harris, the northeast of Scotland. We're undertaking some work using British Sign Language. And during the pandemic and lockdown, we conducted 2 or 3 projects remotely. So to date, we've published about 1,300 recordings from our project. We have about 500 or 600 recordings on hand that we're currently processing, and the collection's ever growing because fieldwork is ongoing. So the second slide I'll put up here, which will give you some more information on project. We have two project websites, the first of which is the main project website. So that will give you more contextual information about who we are and what we do and how we work. And the second one, which I think is very important and echoes what Shonad was saying, is that the archive, we often think of it as the end point of a project. From our point of view, it's actually integral to the conduct of the fieldwork. So it's very important to us in the creation of the fieldwork. And I'll say a little bit more about that in a minute. So I'll leave that slide up to give you time to copy down those links. So yeah, the Regional Ethnology of Scotland project is a large-scale, community-based oral history project. They've been running since 2011, as I say. We work in partnership within the regions with the local authority, library and archive services. And through them, we work directly with members of the public and with groups within the regions in which we work. So that can be local history societies or social enterprises, for example. But mainly, we seek to work directly with the public. So we make direct contact with members of the public. And we do that through our partnerships with the local authority, library and archive services. We also advertise our work through local press, and we hold public meetings and events in the places in which we're active to try and encourage participation. And people that we're keen to participate is pretty much anybody that wants to. We're keen to find out about life and society in the regions in which we work, and so we're very keen that the people in the places in which we work are the ones that tell us about that life and society. So we make direct contact with people of the public. We offer them the opportunity to participate either as interviewers or interviewees or both. So the vast majority of fieldwork that's conducted on our project is actually conducted by volunteer field workers. The vast majority of those have never done anything like this before. So we provide them with training. We train them on how to conduct oral history fieldwork. We provide them with the necessary equipment and documentation. And we also support them in their endeavour and encourage them to continue their participation. And those that do participate, quite a lot of people do a single interview, but we've got one or two interviewers rather, who've conducted more than 40 interviews. So we leave it up to those that are involved as to the level of participation. And the feedback that we get from people who participate in the work in our project as both interviewers and interviewees is that they find it very positive. People feel valued. They feel valued to be invited to participate and to share their knowledge. It's life-affirming to many people that their life experiences are valued by other people, and to be part of a university-based project that seems to confer some sort of validation in a sense. So participation in a project like this it's fun, it's impactful, and a lot of people learn a lot about, even if they've lived in a place their whole life. A frequent comment we get from people is that in doing this kind of work, they've learned stuff that they otherwise hadn't come across. So that, in very condensed form, is what we do. And what I'll go on to talk about now is how we go about it, the approach that we take, because this may be of use to you in considering your participation in the SEA project. Sorry, my machine seems to have stopped working. Hang on. Can you all still hear me? Right, sorry about that. Yeah, so I'll go on to talk about the approach that we take. So the main thing, because we're a public facing project, is we make it as easy as possible for people to participate, both as interviewers and interviewees. And that might sound like an obvious and simple thing to say, but it's an important thing to try and keep hold of as researchers or workers in the community, to try and, we're encouraging people to participate. We therefore want to make the process as enjoyable and as easy for those that come along and offer to participate. We try, this is quite difficult to do, but we do try and include people who don't normally participate in projects like this to take part in these sorts of projects. So that can be difficult to do, and one of the ways in which we do that is that we make ourselves publicly available. So, and physically, we plant ourselves within the communities. So, for example, in Dumfries and Galloway, we'd been running for about 18 months, and we realised that we didn't have any participation from Dumfries itself. And we sought to address that by taking over an empty shop for 3 days, and we mounted a photographic exhibition with photographs from the Ewart Library in Dumfries. And we invited people to come in, the general public. We were open all day for 3 days. And we were there on hand, and we just chatted to them about the exhibition and about what we were hoping to do with our research project. And from that project, from that 3-day event, we eventually accrued, I think, 42 interviews from people who otherwise hadn't been involved. So it's just to say that it's worth trying to go beyond libraries and archives sometimes to invite others to participate, although all that does take time, but I think it's time that's well invested. Another aspect of what we do is that we are very keen to include all ages in our project. It's true to say that the vast majority of participants are above the age of 60. That being said, though, we do encourage, we are interested in everybody's life experiences. So the age range of our project is 8 to 103. We have quite a number of interviews of school children under the age of 10. And those interviews are not just as interviewees, but also we've trained, I think 90, around about 90 now, 10-year-old pupils to become interviewers themselves. And they've then gone on to conduct school-based research projects, which have been folded into our project. So just to try and remain open to people of all ages. And lastly, I've sort of alluded to this, is to be physically present in the place that you're conducting your community-based project. With the availability of remote technology and whatnot, it can be quite easy to achieve quite a lot from your desk, but I think it's very, very important to show your commitment to the reality of a community-based project for you to actually be there as a researcher. It's also part of what I was saying earlier on about trying to make the process simple. So that when, for example, when an interview is taking place, what I do is I go and visit the field worker before they're going to conduct their first interview. I take them the recorder, I have a conversation with them to make sure that they remember their training correctly, address any questions they've got, make sure they're comfortable. They then go and interview the person who's being interviewed at whatever venue they want to be interviewed. That's usually their home, because that's where they're most comfortable. I then pick up the recorder from them once that's done and supply them with a copy of the recording and feedback and so forth. So being physically present, although it sounds again like a simple and obvious thing, has over the years I've found people value the fact, or they notice the fact, that you've committed your time to actually go to them to make the process easy for them. It's another way of silently saying that you value their contribution. I'll just say very briefly now, what do we do with the material that we generate? So the first thing we do is we ask our participants, so we ask our interviewers and interviewees what they think should happen to the material. In our project, for example, that has led to, when Dumfries and Galloway, towards the end of the project, we actually held a series of 3 conferences across the region, at which the volunteer field workers gave papers based upon their own fieldwork activity. And that was born out of their input as to, when we said to them, what do you think should happen to the material? They wanted to give it back immediately in a sort of direct manner. So speak to your participants about what they think should happen to the material. For us, it's very, very important, as Shona was saying, that the material is made available, accessible in a rational way. And that led us to form a partnership with the Centre for Research Collections at the university 4 years ago, to begin the process of properly archiving the collection. And that began with an initial conception that would be a cataloguing exercise, and that was part of it. But from that, that led on to digital preservation, input from colleagues across the library, and we're fortunate at Edinburgh to have a digital archivist, and Sarah's input's been very useful. So we've developed systems for all of those activities. And that's what's led to the archive website, the link that I'll put back in the chat room in a minute. So the public now have the archive website, which is a very simple looking introduction into the archive, but behind that is fairly complex archival systems. But from my point of view, the great thing about that is it does, in that rational way, make the collection immediately available, both locally, nationally and internationally. And we make use of a Creative Commons license as well, so as to encourage use of the material. I'm realizing that I've probably overstepping my time, so I'll just finish off by saying that I think the key word in what we do under the Regional Ethnology of Scotland project is community. We're a community-based project. It's the community, it's the people within the community that are our research partners, not just our contributors. And in like manner, I think what Audrey and her team are starting here with this project is the formation of a community of practitioners. And it's good that we're getting together, we can make links, and hopefully we can take it forward. So I've talked for more than 10 minutes. I'll be quiet now. Thank you.
No, that's fantastic. Thank you, Mark. I think as well, what really came across was your experience in dealing with communities, and there were lots of advice about actually creating that trust and giving people the sense of mattering and belonging, which my experience has been, well, who wants to hear from me? You know, I'm nobody special, and it's like, well, actually, you are very special, and it's really important that we do hear from you as well. So again, I think it's that thing of this is the starting point, and it's definitely something, you know, to emphasize, because we cannot capture everyone's stories, and they're all going to be a bit different. And I think what you might find is you're only going to touch the tip of the iceberg, and there's a lot more to everyone involved, and you want to probably go back and then revisit them later on and talk to them in more detail. So that's incredibly useful. But I also think with all the work you've done, I mean, I went to a thing recently and I heard there was over 13,000 recordings in the archive, which I'm just thinking, I don't think in a lifetime I could listen to all of those, but there's a lot of inspiration there from different communities as well that people might want to actually look at in the future, and we'll definitely put that on the resources webpage.
I'll just quickly say, Audrey, it's 1,300, not 13,000.
Oh, 1,300. Okay.
We will get there, but it'll take a wee bit longer.
Okay. Do you think that's doable then in a lifetime? I could listen to them all.
Yeah, yeah.
But that does include things like music as well, doesn't it? There's quite a lot in music, which is interesting, you know, and, you know, to start thinking about, you know, if people are musicians and capturing that. And I know that Sahar, who's here today, writes poetry, and it would be interesting as well to catch that essence as well of the creativity of some of these communities. So something to think about. Thank you very much, Mark, for chatting. Thank you. I'm going to quickly move on to two people who are going to be talking actually today. So Charlie McCann, who is the sound curator at Scotland Sounds, part of the National Library of Scotland. We've done quite a lot, SCA, work with them around communities and providing advice on how to look after your sound recordings, but also the actual objects themselves, like cassette tapes and videotapes and things like that. And I'm so happy that also we're being joined by Connor Walker, who provided a lot of technical expertise to myself, but really to Taylor for the Voices, the Hebridean Story. So within a 6-week period, Taylor was able to learn how to record, also learn how to edit that recording. We'll talk about that as well, the software involved, but also how to label it as well in a digital format so that it can be put into an archive. So we're going to be hearing from Charlie McCann, as I say, sound curator at Scotland Sounds, and Connor Walker, who is audio preservation engineer at Scotland Sounds, National Library of Scotland. And I'm going to just pass over to them. Thanks.
Hello, I'll go first, then hand you over to Connor. I'll just give a brief overview of the Scotland Sounds project and idea. It was essentially established as a way of improving the care of Scotland's sound heritage. It was based with 3 main priorities around preservation of the items, be they physical or digital, connection between collectors in institutions, individuals, groups, community groups, whatever they may be, and the collection of sound material. The idea, it's kind of built on a cooperative notion that the foundation, the Scotland Sound Heritage, should be preserved, promoted and accessed by everyone. And one of the benefits of having a national institution like a library is that we can hopefully facilitate this in quite a major and encompassing way, which is what we're working towards. But sound archives, I think, across the board are, in library terms, quite new. So there's still a lot of work to be done to get to our goals. And this was a way to do that, at least within Scotland. It held regular stakeholder meetings, which were coordinated by the library, and this helped create ties between the community groups, promote shared responsibility, or a sense of shared responsibility, and proactively increased engagement. As with anything that happened, COVID sort of put a stop to a lot of the things that were going on in that, and staff changes. Speaking for myself, I've only been in this role since January, so we're starting some new lines of work at the moment, mainly sort of working in the background around technical aspects of making the things that we collected during the projects that we're about to outline available. But this sort of means building a digital infrastructure, firstly within the library, and then to make that face outwards. The two main projects that came off the back of Scotland Sounds were the Unlocking Our Sound Heritage project, which we did in partnership with the British Library, and it had funding from the National Lottery Heritage Fund, and that allowed us to employ more staff on a sort of temporary basis, if you like, and engage with a lot more volunteers, as well as do the very practical work of collecting and digitising material from our partnership institutions. We managed to preserve more than 5,000 at-risk sound items from 17 collection partners, and these crossed across all kinds of genres and formats, from wax cylinders and 78s to magnetic cassettes and digital files, which Connor will tell you all about. Also, as a result of that, allowed us to engage with the communities and have artists in residence programmes, worked with schools and community events, and put on training for people that are in positions similar to yourselves. The larger volunteer programme was held here at the Kelvin Hall, and because we have that space and the ability to access it, we had a lot of volunteers coming through, and this was actually really successfully transferred over to the working from home environment that we all found ourselves in. As when COVID really started, we still managed to get all our targets and tick all the boxes for the inclusion and feedback and stuff that needed to happen around that. Another project we did was called Connecting Scotland Sounds. It was a 2-year project, ran between 16 and 17, funded by the Esme Fairbairn Foundation. Similarly, this allowed us to employ staff for set periods of time to work on the collections in question. This was more focused on sort of knowledge exchange and public engagement. Through the course of that, we managed to engage with over 3,000 people, including upskilling the people in the heritage sector on how to deal with their audio collections that have a habit of languishing in cupboards and under bookcases and that sort of thing. So we got out there and showed people how to take care of stuff. Also, one of the intentions we managed to complete was to get people to engage with their sounds creatively in a way that made them able to expose them to new audiences, which is maybe something that'll be interesting to yourselves. I'm running out of time. Basically, as things went on, the staff changes that came around COVID have sort of put a lot of this stuff, certainly especially the more physical items of it, on the back burner. But what we're working to do, starting from now, basically, is get the stakeholder meetings back on running, increase the engagement, and that on a more digital footing, if you like, but to integrate that more into the physical world as well. So take the stuff we were working on before, put some of it online, figure out the best way of expanding it around that. And that's really me. That's a very brief introduction to that. If you want to check out the website, do go on that. If you've got any questions, I'm happy to take them. And now over to Connor for the technical work.
Thank you, Charlie. I'm Connor Walker, the audio preservation engineer at the National Library of Scotland. And currently, Charlie and I are the sound team at the library. I primarily work with magnetic tape carriers, cassettes, quarter-inch tape, open reels, DAT, mini discs, those types of materials that we now know have approached obsolescence or continue to approach obsolescence, which thankfully the human voice has not. And I suppose what I'm excited about for this project over the coming year, through Unlocking Our Sound Heritage, I transferred around 5,000 to 6,000 tapes from across Scotland. And as a blow-in to this land, that was utterly fascinating to learn about the culture around me. But additionally, I found it interesting and somewhat disturbing at what voices we preserve and protect and which voices we silence. And I think this project speaks to a hope that we are going to capture voices in a more pluralistic manner in the present than what we have preserved in the past. So I'm really looking forward to some of the diverse recordings and voices that are going to come out of this project. Given we only have a short amount of time, I don't want to get too far into the weeds with equipment and technology and whatnot. Taylor, Audrey, and I had the privilege of running a little workshop maybe a year ago. My idea, or my experience of time right now, as I'm sure a lot of ours is a little dented. But we ran a workshop about a year ago, just before a trip that Taylor took to do some oral history interviews for the Voices of the Hebridean, Voices of the Hebridean project. And I think what was great about that workshop is it was hands-on, especially in hands-on in the middle of a pandemic has become somewhat of a rarity. And for this group and the upcoming project, I hope we get the opportunity to do a few more of those workshops. And please come to me with any questions you have about recording. I guess I will say, and as a way to not get into the weeds of technology, think about things like the spaces you're recording in and the voices you're recording and what you want to say and what you're hoping, and obviously to allow who you're recording to speak. And not to suggest that the recording equipment or the file format or the software should be an afterthought, but that it should be designed, that aspect of things should be designed with a bit of flexibility so that it doesn't take precedence, so it doesn't completely overwhelm the process. There's some great open source software that's free, like Audacity, which Taylor used for her project. And so if you want, I can send a link to that piece of software. And it's very similar to some very expensive professional softwares as well. So that is available. And in terms of any other questions or comments you have around recording devices, equipment, file formats, that type of thing, feel free to ask them in the Q&A or at any time as this project moves forward. So yeah, thank you. I look forward to to working with you all.
Great, thank you, Connor. That's fantastic. I was sort of halfway writing there saying that we are hoping to do some more workshops around editing and other sort of technical issues. We could even perhaps do something in person, but we can also do things online, because we have got Vicky, who's an Orkney. We've got Shona and Caroline, I think, is up in the Western Isles. We've got Sarah, who's in Perth and Kinross. Phil's joined us from Aberdeen. We've got Susan from Clackmannanshire, and Michael from Glasgow, and Ash from Edinburgh, and I'm trying to see who else we've got. So we are pretty covered, actually. So a lot of stuff's going to probably be online, but if we can get together before the 30th, we will try and do that. And it sort of reminds me that Taylor will be asking for some feedback from today, which will be really helpful when it comes to actually producing more resources for the project. And that hopefully will include Connor as well. So thank you very much, Connor, for taking us through that and introducing us to the sort of technical aspects of recording and oral history. And also, I think Charlie as well, for telling us all about the stuff that Scotland Sounds already do, and the number of people that you actually work with. And if anyone doesn't know, I suggest they have a look at Gairloch Museum, because they have been using oral history in a very creative way in their exhibitions. If you were thinking of doing something similar, using the Gaelic language up in Gairloch Museum. So I'm going to just crack on, actually, and introduce Chris Afuakwa. I hope I have pronounced that correctly, the storyteller at Scottish Refugee Council, who's been incredibly helpful to date with bringing groups of people together with archivists. He's worked at the Scottish Refugee Council since 2018, and before that he actually spent 15 months volunteering in Calais, raising awareness of the situation at the French and UK border. He is a storyteller, as his job description says, and he's very good at supporting new Scots coming into the country and sharing their stories and connecting communities, which, as I say, he's done quite a lot of to date so far in this project. So I'm going to pass over to Chris. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Audrey, and thank you everyone so far for your talks. Has been fantastic. Particular hello to, and Cara's just left, and Sahar as well at GREC. Really great to see you all on here and to meet some new faces as well. Can everyone see my screen okay? Perfect. Let me just get that started. So, yes, thank you for the introduction, Audrey. I'll now pretty much say the same thing, unfortunately, but I'll try to bore you. So, yes, as I said, I volunteered in Calais 2017 to 2018. Volunteering on the ground, and began with some fellow volunteers there to try and raise some awareness of what was going on the ground as well, through creating short films and blogs and capturing just some of the story that really wasn't getting told at all. I returned to Scotland, began volunteering up here, trying to bridge that gap a bit, and joined Scottish Refugee Council at the end of 2018 in our policy and communications team. And during lockdown, this role developed to become storytelling officer, which is a great title, I think, for a job. And it covers a whole sort of variety of things. I run media trainings for people who want to engage with the media, or just to pass on skills for people who might and maybe don't, that's fine. And I also do sort of our press releases and social media and stuff like that. But I think just having it in the title has really led to some really lovely other opportunities to share, to connect people with other organisations such as Scottish Council and Archives. So I think the title attracted Audrey perhaps to get in touch, and from there been able to link Scottish Council and Archives up with community groups across Scotland. So have done that by utilising our network that we have. We've got a forum called New Scots Connect, so put it out through that forum to try and attract some groups to it, and also out through sort of individual contacts. There's been specific council areas have really wanted to particularly speak to people, so sort of racked our brains to connect folk up. And I guess in my spare time I'm a writer as well. So we're going to talk a little bit about SRC, why I do the work I do, and then a little bit about some of the best practices I've kind of developed around speaking to people, gathering stories, sharing stories, which I think will probably echo a lot of what's been said already as well, particularly by Mark. So we're working in a pretty horrible environment. The hostile environment is specifically called that. And it is designed to make life as difficult as possible for people in the asylum system, for people seeking safety, and it's getting worse. This week, Nationality and Borders Bill becomes an act, so that will significantly change how the UK government approaches working with people seeking safety, and it's not a good thing. We're also facing the Rights Removal Bill, which has been in the pipeline for a while, but is getting wrapped up now in response to the European Court on Human Rights blocking the deportation flight to Rwanda last week. And obviously, this is all happening within a context of multiple global crises, climate emergency, nothing good. So within that, Scottish Refugee Council does a multitude of things, but we're also just part of a massive jigsaw puzzle of organisations, community groups, grassroots supporters, all across Scotland. And so within that, we offer direct support to various groups. We have helplines for signposting and information and support. We have a growing community development team which works across Scotland, and we were able to really utilise them in order to speak to groups about this project. We do a lot of policy and advocacy and media and campaigning, which is where my role sits, and arts and culture as well. And at the end of this, I'll talk a little bit about Refugee Festival Scotland, which we've just finished. But first, I want to just look at why I do what I do, why we do what we do, why it's important. So there's a bit of a spot the difference on the left hand of the screen. You'll see really quite a disturbing headline. I wasn't involved in this. I don't know the family, but I can speculate that this was the Sun journalist that spoke to this man was the first person that he'd managed to speak to since arriving in Scotland about his story. Very traumatised, has just fled Afghanistan. He's now in a small town in North Scotland, presumably the only Afghan family there, possibly the only non-white person in the town, and struggling for various reasons. I believe his wife was ill. They felt he was far away from the hospital, stuff like this. And within a few weeks, a Sun journalist speaks to him and captures this headline: "I'd rather risk beheading by the Taliban than live in Wick," which does no favours for the wider community, let alone for himself, for him as well. He's going through something traumatic, and really there's a safeguarding issue, to be honest, for him and his family that's been published at all, and there's a safeguarding issue for other people in hotels across the UK, etc. On the other side of the screen, this is someone who I worked with a few years ago on this story. She came to a couple of media trainings and worked with us to sort of figure out what parts of her story she was going to share and what not to share so publicly. And I was there for the photo shoot, was there through the interview, and I'll talk a little bit on my next slide about just sort of the process I go through when supporting someone to share their story, which might be, I know we're obviously not working on stuff here which is going out to wide press, but obviously we are working on stories that will be viewed or can be viewed by anyone, and just thinking of some of the sort of safeguarding concerns that might come up for groups that are getting involved. So one of the things I really like doing is working with people on setting their boundaries, so thinking about what they do want to talk about and what crucially they don't want to talk about, or things they might want to mention but not go deep into, and just trying to give people as much agency over their story as possible. And I really feel like this project will lend itself to that. Knowing questions in advance that you can prepare as well is really crucial, or just knowing the sort of general way that's going to work. I know we've talked about how past, present and future would probably be a good way to approach this project, so just ensuring that folk we're interviewing know that in advance and can prepare. In terms of going to the media, we have my colleagues at IMIX, which is a communications charity based in London, now working across the UK, which tries to tie all of our messaging together basically across all the various organisations. Have developed a really great safeguarding checklist for people to work through if they're thinking about engaging with an interview, and it's sort of asked questions about this can be seen anywhere. Do you feel comfortable with that? Would you prefer to be anonymous? And I'm happy to share links to that in the chat as well if anyone's interested. I also like to do a mock interview before, just sort of help people practice if they're up for it. And then just regular check-ins and support, whether that's being present at the interview or checking in before, during, and making sure definitely checking in afterwards as well, maybe immediately afterwards and also after a couple of days, just to make sure that people are comfortable with what they've said and are still feeling okay about it. So that's just a very brief sort of overview, I think, of my work. I'm more than happy to connect with anyone on this further. I'll just finish on a light note, although sadly it is over. Refugee Festival Scotland runs every year around World Refugee Day, which was last Monday, 20th of June. So this year it went on for 10 days and finished yesterday. It's a celebration of the contribution that refugee and migrant populations make to Scotland. It is, we had over 90, possibly over 100 events across Scotland this year from the borders. We were meant to have one up on the Isle of Skye, but unfortunately it got cancelled. But we definitely had a good geographical spread. It was definitely a success. It's a really great way of getting stories out there. And the theme of this year was storytelling as well, just thoroughly in keeping with the Year of Stories 2022. So yeah, great success, still recovering. And yeah, anyway, thank you very much for listening to me and look forward to any questions you might have later on.
Great. Thank you, Chris. Thank you. Yeah, it's hard. It's very hard what you're doing, and it is not everyone on the project will be obviously recording the stories of people who are that new to Scotland. I know that some of the projects are going to be, with second or third generation, but it's really good to hear from you and your experience, and also how positive it is, because the events I've been to with you, Chris, have been incredibly, really good fun actually, and everyone is actually probably really quite upbeat considering what they have been through. But it's that sense of belonging and feeling safe. It's it's great to be part of that actually, and I think Connor was also alluding to that. So lots of really helpful things to think about actually. Thank you, Chris. I'm going to go on to our last speaker, who actually I know very well, Sakit Razak at the Colourful Heritage. They have been, I think it's 12 years you've been probably going, you're going to remind me, that it might be before that, but I think it's 12 years that you have been recording, not just in oral history terms, but actually there's lots of other things going on in Colourful Heritage as well, but you're very sort of well known for your oral history recordings and videos, and that's what you're going to talk to us about today, about capturing the elders' stories. And maybe giving us some useful tips as well on how to approach interviewing people who probably thought they would never be in front of a camera, or their oral history would be recorded in some way and listened to hundreds and thousands of times going by your YouTube channel. So I'm going to pass over to you, Sahib. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Audrey. Thanks for that nice introduction. And yeah, we have got so many resources just from this online video archive, which is one of our first resources that we created. So we went on to then, you know, celebrate and be part of an exhibition and create all sorts of other kinds of resources. But if I can just share my slides in the first instance. Can everyone see that? Is that okay? Everyone can see that? Yep, just give me a thumbs up, Audrey, you can see that? Yep, great, okay. So today my talk is going to be about preserving the history of Scotland, South Asians and Muslims. I think what I wanted to share first of all is a little bit of background actually about colourful heritage. A lot of you may, some of you may have heard of us, but many of you may not have. I know that we've got Michael, who's part of City Archives, and he's very familiar with our work in a different way. He's dealing with the Bashir Man archive that we've been involved in. But essentially, colourful heritage is one of the largest South Asian focused community-led initiatives in Scotland, and possibly even in the whole of UK. And we've been around for about 12 years. And I just wanted to highlight that we started off about 12 years ago with just a conversation amongst a group of friends that, you know, there just wasn't enough being done to preserve this South Asian and Muslim heritage. And the fact that there were so many of our elders in the community that were passing away, they were getting so old, but yet nobody had asked them about how they came here, why they came here, what did they do. Nothing like that had been ever done before, and particularly in Scotland. And, you know, so in order to want to try and capture the stories to fill a gap, you know, this whole archival silence that we had in this particular community. And to be honest, I didn't realise this either until I started in this work, this project, that we've been around for about over 100 years. We've been part of Scottish sort of society that, you know, well into over 100 years ago, somebody called Nathal Muhammad, that the first kind of recorded person that I know of that come to Scotland. So we've been here for a long time, but yet there was nowhere where these sort of stories of ambition, identity, you know, what people got up to, this kind of very unique and rich history, nowhere was it being recorded. So we took it upon ourselves to do this. So this slide will show you that, you know, we capture, these are our aims, we capture, we celebrate and we inspire. In terms of capture, we're talking about is capturing the stories of the South Asian and Muslim elders, essentially, who've been here for a long time. So we want to find out from them the essence of, you know, how did they make it, how did they survive in this country, what did they do, what kind of, you know, how does the family cope. So that's kind of things we want to try and find out. And we do this using video histories. And then we wanted to celebrate. So this is just a picture of, you know, obviously the First Minister coming to see our exhibition at Scotland Street School Museum, which at the moment is temporarily closed. But that's what, you know, it's kind of the resource that doing video archives can, or having an online archive can help with. You know, you're learning so much that you're able to then go out and talk to other people within the community and collect objects and be able to put on a display. And also to inspire others. So we do a lot of talks, we have a schools digital pack, and we have so many other resources that we can now use that schools are also able to get a hold of as well. So that's our website address, colourfulheritage.com, so do feel free to explore that. So far, just to give you a flavour, we've managed to capture over 125 very unique and interesting stories of mainly the elders. And sometimes we might have somebody of a second or third generation coming on to tell the story of the grandparent as well, because, you know, it might have been somebody that's passed away, we just haven't been able to capture, and they want to, you know, offload, or they want to talk, they want their story to be known. And of course, these stories have been told by the people themselves, not by anyone else. So they're sharing their story, their experiences through their own word of mouth. So like I said, this is one of the largest online archives of South Asian video histories in Scotland, possibly even UK. And we've got both men and women from Glasgow, Edinburgh and Dundee, and obviously also across a variety of faiths. So it can be Sikhs, Muslims, Hindus, South Asian Christians, anybody at all really. And of course, mainly these stories are told in English, with a few of them actually being in Urdu and Punjabi. So that shows that the community integrated very well and are now, after being here for 50, 60, 70 years, able to tell their story in English so that their future generation or younger generation can understand as well. And in fact, all the Urdu and Punjabi interviews that we have done have now been subtitled in English on our YouTube channel. So if you go into the YouTube page and turn on the subtitles, you're able to then get greater access to a bigger, a larger amount of the archive. It's not just limited to just the English speaking videos. And so our stories capture, our interviews actually capture stories that people want to share right the way through from the partition of India and Pakistan in 1947, right the way through to their own migration stories, coming to Scotland, why they came here, how they came here. Some came by ship, some came by boat, some came by traveling to lots of countries by car. And also, what kind of work people got involved in, how did they manage to support themselves and their families. And of course, for the ladies, we asked them about family life, because before they started working, they were, looking after the children and how they coped without having that family support. And of course, we asked them about, identity, what do they feel is their identity now, having been here in this country for so long, and also the role of religion. And what we find is that a lot of the archive is used by, researchers. Very often people in the media are getting in touch with us quite a lot, research groups, people from other countries are wanting to come or wanting us to give them a talk about the history that we've managed to piece together. So it's being used very extensively at the moment. We have so many different types of emails coming in for all sorts of requests. So I just wanted to highlight quickly why the stories are important for this group. Obviously, the first one, like I said, was the massive archival silence. But secondly, each video has a unique and sort of fascinating history, and I feel that it contains precious advice and life experience from our elders. And it covers so many different topics that, anybody listening can benefit. So it's right the way through from entrepreneurial skills to integration skills, kind of hard work, what kind of work people did, and how they survived in a foreign country. So there's something for everyone, young and old, and you can gain so much life experience listening to the elders. And of course, the third thing is the fact that we wanted this history to be told, be preserved and told by the people themselves, by the community itself, in their own words. So ours is an oral video history. So we've captured this by video, and the reason for this is we wanted to be able to capture the person's face. We wanted to capture who they were so people can recognise instantly. That helps when they're listening to it. They think, oh yeah, we know that person. Oh yeah, that used to be somebody that we met at the shops, and I've seen him at a wedding, or whatever it is. But at the same time, the actual interview itself helps to capture, the emotions, the facial expressions, and also the tone of voice in which a person speaks. So it really captivates the audience. And of course, in digital format, that was the other reason we use oral videos. It's something that the youth can engage in better. The youth are so much involved in digital media at the moment, social media, through their phones, iPads, that this seemed to be the logical media for us. But of course, there are many challenges in interviewing South Asian elders, and obviously elders from any community, I would imagine, and also doing this as a video history. So I think this has probably been touched on before as well, what some of the challenges are. And one of the biggest challenges that we've had is convincing the elders to share their story, because they're a very humble and hardworking community, and they don't want to be seen that someone is highlighting their issues, so they don't want to talk about their issues, or especially openly the kind of issues, because they just seem to think everybody had those, so there's no big deal. We just managed to get through them and trundle on and get through everything. So they don't want to highlight their issues, and secondly, they don't want to feel that they're boasting about what they've achieved in their life. They think, well, there's no point sharing that. So they don't realise that actually by sharing a story, telling a story, it will help somebody else listening as to, what the important points are, or to help somebody else relate to what they're going through at the moment. So I guess, you need to, there's lots of points here, things like communication. Sometimes when you're speaking to elders, their hearing's not very good, or when they talk back to you, their speech is not clear. It can also be issues with language in terms of native language that they want to use, or or whether it's English. And also sometimes they can be a little bit hesitant if it's a female interviewee and there's a male interviewer, or vice versa. So, so these are all things to think about. They can be nervous about answering questions. They can be very nervous about being recorded or facing a camera, or even just being recorded orally. And also things like location of interview can be quite important. So I'm just going to go through my next slide, which will give you some more sort of tips about this. But I guess when you're doing video interviews or any kind of oral interviews, we've talked about this before, you need to have consent. You need to reassure your subject that your interview, that their story really does matter, and why it matters, and how it can benefit others. And also the fact, reassure them that their story can be will be used in a positive way, not negatively, because that's one of the biggest fears that somebody has when they're talking to you or highlighting. They're letting you right into their life, so they want to make sure that it's not going to be used in a negative way. So in terms of research and know your interviewee beforehand, I would suggest that having some kind of soft conversations with them beforehand, hearing their story beforehand. So this might be by way of a telephone call or a Zoom call, or just being in touch with them a couple of times. Building up a rapport is very important, in fact, and that helps to get you both comfortable in communicating. Making note of anything that is unique about their story that you may want to pick up on, and tease that out to them when you're asking them questions. You want to try and also this helps you to help jog their memory as well, and it helps them to open up. And they may actually have some photos that they want to share with you, or even want you to put them in the interview recording as well, if it's a video recording. So these are very some kind of tips just on the research and knowing your subject. The second one is just being patient and allowing interview time, because you can't just say to yourself, right, it's going to be 30 minutes and that's it. Sometimes it can take a lot longer, especially when you're dealing with an elderly person. They might want to go to the bathroom, or they might want to take a little breather or take a little drink break. So you have to be very, very patient and speak very slowly and clearly. You want to consider writing down the questions for them so that they can physically see the question sometimes, because they might not hear or might not understand what you're saying. So there's lots of little things that can help. And of course, this will all help your subject to help them relax and feel valued. So don't rush. Okay. The other thing I've got is if they might want to have a family member present to help them translate if that's not the first language, or you might want to be able to provide a translator. In Colourful Heritage's case, I'm able to speak Urdu, Punjabi and English, and to some extent I can understand another dialect, Mirpuri, so it makes it a little bit easier that I can do that. So you might want to be able to try and either get a translator or a volunteer translator, so that it's smooth when you're asking them questions or they're responding to you, that the whole process is running quite smoothly. Sometimes they might want to you need to just check with your interviewer that, are they okay with you interviewing them? They might say, actually, I prefer if it was a male, depending on what they're talking about. or they maybe just feel a little bit intimidated. So you just need to try and find out what works best for them. But most, I think, importantly of all, is keeping them informed of what to expect during the process. So that means letting them know up front of any areas that they might not, that you want to talk about, and maybe checking with them what they don't want to talk about. Ask if there's anything that really a fun story that they want to highlight. So it gives them enough time to think about it and get the information. Also having a pool of questions ready so that you've got certain questions, but letting them know what kind of questions you will be asking them so that they can think about it. And very often elders, South Asian elders, they might not be familiar with it, with sort of written text. Whereas if you're telling them and speaking to them, it helps them to think about what they want to say, and get the wording correct as well. So I would say that have some guidelines that you can go through at the start to let them know that it's okay to ask a question again, or the fact when you answer a question, try and answer it in full. So instead of just saying, what year did you come to Scotland? Don't just say 1965, but say something like, I came to Scotland in 1965. So just to kind of explain some of these guidelines so that if you are editing the final interview, then it just means it's a coherent story. Even other things like, that you won't interrupt them. You might use a thumb sign to say that everything's okay, carry on, keep talking. So just little things like that, being able to repeat a question. And also, sometimes they can get very nervous about being recorded, even if it's not a camera. So I would say that just getting to know your subject helps them, or your interview, it just helps them to relax. And if they're being recorded with a camera, try and make them focus on you so that the camera isn't on their face. The camera can be aside, filming from the side, but they're actually having a conversation. And what I find is very often they start off quite nervous, and you have maybe a bit of a mock 5 minutes or so, or 10 minutes, and then they actually forget that there's a camera there. They're quite happy to talk about anything and share anything. So yeah, that's one of the other things. And also, if you're doing oral recordings, just keep it to being a discreet microphone, so it's maybe attached to their clothes, so it's not very obvious to them, so it's not interfering in any way. So that can also help. And I think just having some water to hand, or maybe just letting them know where the bathroom is and telling them that everything's okay, that can help too. And also the location of interview, you might want to consider not just them coming to you, but you going out to them. That can also help in the whole process in convincing them that actually their story does matter. And of course, last thing, most of all, have fun chatting and listening to their story and make them feel valued. And of course, by doing all of this, you're actually just thanking them for their time effectively as it is. I see some really happy interviewees here. Just thank you to you all for listening. Thank you.
That is great. Thank you, Sakib. Lots of helpful hints there as well. And we did talk about a little bit about, wanting people to maybe learn more about their local authority archive, and if they've never been there before, I would very much encourage people to invite their group in, the people involved, maybe show them some other material from your collections as well. And hopefully this is a start of a friendship that's going to go into the future. It's not just a one-off, and you'll be still talking to these people in years to come. So thank you, Sakib. There was something that you brought up, and I'm going to let Ishbel McKinnon ask the question, because it's something I think the speakers are thinking that it was going to be asked. So I'm going to ask Ishbel, who's the archivist at Perth and Kinross, to ask her question.
Hello, Audrey. Can you hear me all right?
Yes.
Okay, that's good. The question was predictably whether any of the panel have a preference over audio or video interviews. I can see that there's perhaps sort of a pros and cons for both of them. And so I was initially thinking in terms of perhaps sort of preservation perspectives, but also in terms of the research content Sakib has talked about, what extra you get from having the video interview, because you see expressions in people's faces and things like that. So I'd just be really interested to know if there's a consensus, or just to hear about people's differing viewpoints on that.
I might ask just each of the speakers, like Shona, to start, because you were the first person to speak. If you have any thoughts on that, and then I'll ask Mark and etc. and we'll go, or whoever, because
yeah.
Mark, you did.
Well, as Ishbel has just said, there are pros and cons of each. With audio, I think the advantages from an archivist point of view with audio is the size of the files that are produced. So they don't take up such a massive amount of storage, and audio is probably easier to preserve, whereas audiovisual files can be tricky for a general archive and not a specialist repository, I would say, just because there are more, I think, more complications with audiovisual material. But I think Mark is probably more qualified than me to comment on the technical side of audio and audiovisual. But yeah, each, in terms of the actual archive and the research, each format has advantages and disadvantages. I'll pass on to Mark.
Yeah, absolutely. So the video files are much larger, and it's not just the size of them, it's the digital preservation of them is more involved than the audio side. But really, from a fieldworking perspective, we make our project is mainly audio, but we do occasionally make use of video, and we do so when video is absolutely required. So, for example, part of our work is we're trying to develop an approach to oral history that includes BSL. So those interviews were conducted entirely in BSL, and therefore were videoed, because that's the primary language. The primary language of the interview is always privileged in our collection. So in that instance, it absolutely had to be a video that was made use of. We did a walking tour with two people from Dumfries, where they walked around the town, and they were describing the townscape through their life and the changed use of shops and so forth. And recording that using video was fantastic. It gave a real added worth to the content. That being said, the audio recordings that we do they're different in nature, in that the context is different. People are less concerned about being recorded because their image isn't being collected. For some reason, people seem to relax a bit more quickly when it's just an audio recorder. The technology of the video recorder that we use is, in size, it's very similar to the Zoom. It's another Zoom recorder. It's very small. But yet people are still wary of their image being collected, or can be. So I guess what I would say is that if you want to make use of video, like for example, what Sikid was saying for her project, I can absolutely see that video is the right approach to take for the aims and objectives of the project. For our project, because we're interviewing a lot of people, the quantum of material, if it was purely in video, would have been too much. And also, as I was saying, people are reticent, or slightly more reticent, being recorded, their image being recorded. So largely we make use of audio, but I wouldn't ever rule out video. And the technology to capture video, the cost of the recorder we use is a bit more expensive than the audio recorder, but it's not that much more expensive. And it's very easy to use and very robust and so on and so forth. So I'll put up a link, or I'll send Taylor a link to the video recorder we use. But yeah, use it where appropriate, I guess I'd say.
Connor and Charlie, any thoughts on that? Anything to add?
It's really interesting and great what Mark was just reiterating, that the language takes precedent to whether video or audio is a better format. And there are a lot of questions around access and how sound can be accessible to some communities and completely inaccessible to others, and video it mirrors that as well. on the technical side of things, I mean, the 3-year Unlocking Our Sound Heritage project, we went through a 27 gigabyte server in 3 years, and our moving image department goes through that sometimes in 1 month. And the compression algorithms that they have to use to ingest, you know, these raw files is much more complicated than audio. You know, and as expressed earlier, you know, we are considered kind of a specialist archive for these materials, and even we struggle on that front. Now, with that said, so the YASA standards that kind of defines how sound should be archived and all of the different technical aspects. I mean, the size of the size and the fidelity of the recording is just, it's asinine. I mean, we do abide by it, and I'm not saying we shouldn't, but it's at a higher quality than a Beyonce record would be recorded at. And oftentimes this is a kind of fuzzy 30-year-old cassette tape, and then we're, you know, running it through just this, you know, impeccably high fidelity analog to digital converter. For smaller oral history projects, I don't think that is necessary. I think when determining how you want to use these files and the technology, I think there needs to be a lot of thought put into, is this just for the sake of archiving it? Is it for a podcast? Is it to pair with video? Is it for, you know, people to mix into music, etc. I do recommend recording as a WAV file because it's uncompressed and you can do all of the editing. And if you're running out of space when you need to ingest it in your archive or put it up online, that's when you can then compress it to a more accessible format. Yeah, you can't record from a lower fidelity and then boost it from there, but you can record at a high fidelity and then go, oh no, we don't have enough room, we're going to have to compress this. So yeah.
That's good advice. Charlie, I don't know if you have anything to add to that. Just
I think most bases have been covered.
Yeah,
I would say
yeah.
that having worked in both moving image and audio, they're different. There's different things. That audio's immersive in a different way.
Mm-hmm.
So it affects people's attention and how they engage with the stories that are being told. So that's something to consider when you're thinking about that. I would also say from a technical perspective, I don't think anyone's mentioned that audio is simpler, which people have said, but there's less requirement in the future for the migration of formats, which I think is more prevalent with audio-visual material. And long-term storage is expensive.
Yeah.
Unless if you're keeping a small archive of stuff. And as a sound curator, I would point out as well that there's no chance of getting your soul stolen by having your visual image taken. Yeah. So that's something to keep in mind when you're doing interviews.
Yeah.
Soul
yeah.
theft.
Well, that's quite interesting, because actually maybe that's something Chris might comment on, about maybe people feeling a bit uncomfortable having their image reported. I don't know, Chris, is that something?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, that was probably my only sort of point to add there. I think also depends on the person, but obviously audio is better for anonymity for anyone who maybe wants to change their name or whatever, just to have it along with their piece. Obviously, some people are quite happy to put their face everywhere, and that's great as well. But I think with, I don't know, Sakib totally has a different view on this as well. I'm really interested to hear your thoughts. But add for the fact that obviously it's far easier to store and save audio files, as well as the fact that some people probably will want to remain more anonymous, then that would be the way I go with it.
my thought is, Hugh, actually, is I love the videos, but I partly wonder if that's because you maybe already know the people who you are speaking to.
Yeah, so I don't know everybody that I'm speaking to, but when we speak to them or when they approach us, they already know that we do video recording, so they're quite happy with that. So I guess,
yeah,
you know, anybody that's not really, you know, because that's our main resource, isn't it? Doing it by video rather than just oral. I think it just helps, like you said, it just adds to that storytelling experience.
Yeah.
But in the same way that what I would add to this is it does take up a lot of editing time. I don't know if that's been mentioned, but it means it just takes a lot of time to get each one out. So it's not quick and fast, you know, it takes up a lot of time to cut down and cut back and decide what to keep in it and what not to keep. Yeah. Because we're recording the whole story of, you know, and very often that can be footage which is maybe 45 minutes.
Yeah.
Or even more, but what we do is we cut it down, take out all the questions that I've asked and just leave it as though they're talking. And sometimes being elderly, they'll repeat things again, so it'll come later on. You don't want to say to them, actually, we've done that before, because you don't want to interrupt them. But yeah, so we do then end up having to spend a lot of time and creating a paper trail on, you know, which bits to keep. And then, because I don't do the actual physical editing, I'll just advise on which bits to keep and which bits not. And then somebody else will come in and do that. So it does take time.
Yeah, and I was going to say, and just to make it very clear, that for this project, we are just having audio recordings. I think if it's something you want to do in the future, be really exciting. It's something definitely to comment on, and we can go into more details as well about maybe how you go about doing that. But I think for the purposes of this project, and also because it is Year of Stories 2022, we have to complete everything in this year. So I think having the audio is important, because it is possible to do the editing and you know, and the transcription within a short period of time, whereas it's much more complicated, I think, with video, although it does look fantastic, I have to say, Saki.
Thank you.
You know, so I think there's a lot of links and stuff going into the chat, which I think people will find useful and we'll find useful. I don't know if anyone else has any other questions. I don't see anything in the chat room, and I don't see anyone with their hand up either. So I'm just going to, because what we're going to do is there's going to be a feedback form, as I said earlier, about the actual...
Sorry, Audrey, I think Ishbel might have a follow-up question.
Ooh. Oh yes, Ishbel, I do see that. Thanks, Taylor. Before I put Ishbel on, it's just to say we're going to have that feedback form, and I think Taylor's going to put it into the chat room. So if you want to just fill it in now, but also she'll send it out with the recording to this event. And that's really going to help us with providing you with the training and everything that you need and you are looking for, especially if you would like interested in physical or online. I mean, we could try and do some more physical events if people have an appetite for that. But then I'm going to let Ishbel do her follow-up question. Ishbel.
Oh, sorry.
That's
clicking the wrong buttons. Yes, so it's just a very sort of follow-up from that discussion, and it's about digital preservation and hosting of the recordings. Is it something, this is maybe something for a future discussion. I was just thinking about, obviously participating archives will want to hold our own recordings within the archive, but is some thought being given to creating a project archive as well? And if this does become the building block for a longer term recording project, is that something where we might be thinking about contributing to a larger, more enduring collection? And I suppose this is directed slightly in the direction of NLS and Mark at Edinburgh University, who have expertise in that area.
I just want to point out there, you have sort of been reading our minds, Ishbel, by asking that question. So it wasn't. No, that is it's a great question, and it has come about. So it did come up actually at the steering group meeting, and we are looking to have a repository for all the recordings, so that it's so that they can all be kept together and there is some sort of continuity there, as well as having the recordings in the local authority archive. So we're just sort of, chatting about that, Ishbel, but we'll get back to you, very soon, because definitely we are thinking that this is just the first steps. And if you would like to, and other people would like to continue doing this, you could then add to it and keep that project going as well. Because we do think as well that would help if you were looking at future funding applications as well to do this sort of thing. Does that answer your question, Ishbel? I think.
Absolutely, thank you. That's really useful and interesting to know that the discussions have started.
Great, yes, and that would also affect any sort of consent forms or anything that would have to be included in a consent form, that people would know exactly where their recordings are going to be stored, and that they're publicly available as well. So it is a consideration, but we are hopefully on it actually before anyone starts their recordings. I'm just looking, is there any other questions? I'm just looking at the time. Sorry, have I got, we're a little bit over. So I'm not going to sort of like, there were sort of questions that I had, but I don't need to put them up because I think we have made it hopefully very, very clear that we do not want you to hesitate at any point to get in contact. If you have a question that you've maybe forgotten to answer, or maybe you thought about, please do, and probably best to send it to me and Taylor, and we can then pass it on as well, because partly if you have a question, probably someone else has the same question as well, and it'd be really helpful to share that knowledge. So I just want to finish up today by just thanking you again for coming along. I want to thank the speakers. I want to thank the steering group. They're doing this, it's all voluntary, their time that they're giving us. And I hope this has been really useful for everyone. I can see Caroline nodding there. As I say, it's recording, we'll be sending this out to you, and hopefully we'll all be in touch very soon. But thank you very much for coming along, and thanks for all the speakers. Thanks.
Thank you. Guys, can I just really quickly add, if you receive any emails from me, it'll probably be asking you for some content for the website, because we're really keen to make the website really accessible and like show all the stakeholders of the project. So yeah, if anyone hasn't already, I'll send you a reminder email, but any content or pictures of yourself or your group would be great to put on the website. Thank you. Thanks,
Taylor. I should have mentioned that. Yes, please send them in. Anyway, I will say goodbye and we'll see each other soon. All right, bye.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.